Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today because we are jumping right into some seriously fascinating academic work. We're looking at a 2026 doctoral dissertation by Zufia Hajnal. And let me tell you, this research basically challenges the entire foundation of modern economics. We're going to unpack exactly how she builds this really compelling framework around the economic possibilities of selflessness.
Now, you might be wondering, what if the basic assumptions driving our global markets are just, well, fundamentally incomplete? See, mainstream economics largely operates on the assumption that human beings are driven purely by selfish, infinite wants. We're basically painted as these utility-maximizing machines wandering around in a world of scarce resources. But Hajnal's research asks us to reconsider that baseline. It's totally fascinating to think about. What if we actually aren't quite as hopelessly selfish as the textbooks claim we are?
Okay, let's start with Section 1, the modern economic problem, specifically examining what's being called the moral vacuum.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand this moral vacuum, we first need to look at Hajnal's critique of our current market system and its absolute obsession with material accumulation. She identifies a structural flaw here, and she calls it runaway accumulation. It's basically this acceleration where the consequences of overconsumption crash right into rising inequalities that heavily favor the people who are already at the top. The system essentially creates this vicious cycle, where hoarding material wealth becomes the entire point, completely detached from actual human well-being.
And this brings us to a really powerful observation cited in the research from Thomas Veress. He argues that today's economic models are essentially blind to their own conditions of existence. They completely ignore the absolute ecological limits of our planet and, honestly, the psychological limits of us as human beings. We're operating in this systemic moral bubble that's consuming its own foundations, like trust, the environment, social cohesion, the exact things it actually needs to survive.
I mean, this part is just so relatable, right? If the system is so flawed, why aren't we all out there fixing it? Well, just think about your own inbox or your daily newsfeed. Modern individuals are bombarded with so much data and so many societal expectations just trying to keep our heads above water that we literally lack the bandwidth to focus on broader moral frameworks. We just turn inward. It's not that we don't care at all. It's that the sheer overload of the system completely exhausts our capacity for empathy.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. We're looking at the original moral economy, a history of provision.
To figure out how we move forward, the dissertation actually takes a really interesting look backward. Before modern capitalism became the whole shebang, economies were heavily grounded in communities ensuring basic survival for everyone. A moral economy was a system where actions were constrained by a moral consensus. The whole thing started with a community, not the isolated individual. The primary goal definitely wasn't infinite profit. It was a shared subsistence ethos. The basic idea was, hey, everyone has a right to survive.
And academics have actually recognized for a long time that reciprocity often outweighed pure self-interest. Like back in the 18th century, E.P. Thompson looked at English peasant food riots, and he noted they weren't just blind anger. They were driven by a shared community norm of what a fair price for bread should be. Fast forward to 1944, and Karl Polanyi argued that the economy used to be inherently embedded right in social relationships. Then in 1976, James C. Scott documented the substance ethic in Southeast Asia, showing how avoiding starvation for the absolute poorest was prioritized way over maximizing crop yields for the rich.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference between these two paradigms. It is stark. On one side, the mainstream economy assumes we are driven by individual self-interest, boundless wants, and hoarding material wealth. But on the other side, the moral economy is driven by reciprocity, social obligations, and community subsistence. Basically, one assumes we are purely self-serving islands, while the other assumes we are deeply obligated community members.
Moving into Section 3, the shift to moral economics, and how we go about re-engineering these models.
So how do we actually bridge this massive gap today? I mean, obviously, we aren't all returning to 18th century agrarian village life. Instead, researchers in moral economics are taking 3 distinct steps to inject ethics right back into the math. First, they are expanding our environmental understanding. Second, they're applying virtue ethics directly to economic entities, like markets and huge corporations. And third, they are completely revisiting how we even define human needs.
Those first 2 steps are heavily focused on physical and ethical limits. Researchers are actively mapping absolute planetary boundaries and the real physical environmental carrying capacity of the Earth. They are also taking a hard look at the socially upstream propulsion of resources, which, I know, is a very dense academic way of saying they are studying how our current system naturally just funnels wealth, ideas, and capital upwards to the folks who are already wealthy, leaving the environment and lower classes totally depleted.
That brings us to Section 4, Rethinking Basic Human Needs, Finite versus Infinite.
So, the crucial point is this, and Hajnal considers this the absolute most critical piece of the puzzle. We have to fundamentally rethink what humans actually need. The classic neoclassical view tells us that human needs are infinite and strictly insatiable. No matter what, you will always want more. But the moral economics view argues that human needs are inherently finite and satiable. Seriously, think about that for a second. If our real needs actually have a limit, then our entire economic pursuit of infinite, endless growth is based on a massive mathematical fallacy.
To prove this point, the dissertation looks at Manfred Max Neef's matrix of needs. Unlike Maslow's famous pyramid that we've all seen, Max Neef argues that true underlying human needs, things like subsistence, affection, and freedom, are actually universal, and crucially, they are very limited. What does change are the satisfiers, meaning how our culture tells us to meet those basic needs, and the consumer goods, which are just the fleeting desires we end up chasing. It's those superficial consumer wants that drive limitless accumulation, not our actual foundational human needs.
And this realization solves a major economic riddle. If you acknowledge that the aggregate total of real human needs is actually finite, that it stops somewhere, you can finally create a dynamic mathematical equilibrium with the planet's carrying capacity. You literally can't balance infinite growth on a finite planet, but you absolutely can balance finite human needs with finite environmental capacity. It just elegantly reconciles the math.
Let's head into our final section, Section 5, Power of Rational Selflessness and Multiplying Value.
Now, you might be thinking, come on, isn't there something inside us that always wants more? Well, according to Hajnal's framework, there is exactly one human need that actually breaks the rules, and that's the need to help others. This is such a beautifully provocative finding. Our deepest, most limitless desire isn't for a larger house or a faster car. It's for mutual aid, connection, and reciprocity. We possess an almost infinite capacity to want to improve the lives of the people around us.
And this leads us to the core thesis of the entire paper, this concept of rational selflessness. Acting selflessly isn't just a nice moral thing you do on the weekends because it feels good. In this framework, it is a highly logical, deeply rational economic tool. Giving, sharing, and reciprocating actually create and multiply value within an economy. It benefits the receiver, it intrinsically rewards the giver, and it stabilizes the broader society. It is, quite literally, the ultimate economic multiplier.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this thought from Karl Polanyi, which ties everything together perfectly. He wrote, "The true criticism of market society is not that it was based on economics, but that its economy was based on self-interest." Hajnal argues that building our systems on rational selflessness directly fixes this historical flaw. We don't have to throw economics out the window, we just have to replace the flawed axiom of pure self-interest with the scientifically backed reality of selflessness.
So, what's the real-world application here? How do we actually use this? Interestingly, the author advocates shifting away from heavy-handed government macro interventions. Instead, she says the focus should be squarely on education. By cultivating a deep, societal awareness of rational selflessness, basically teaching people that helping others is mathematically and economically sound, we can naturally increase society's marginal propensity to give, share, and reciprocate. You fix the economy by fixing the cultural understanding of what value actually is.
So I want to leave you with this final question. How might recognizing rational selflessness alter your own daily economic decisions? If you truly start to view sharing and helping not as a loss of your own resources, but as a rational multiplier of value for everyone, how does that change the way you interact with the world today? It's a truly remarkable framework, and I challenge you to apply this perspective to your own life. Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with us today. Keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.